Hey, peace, family, peace, family. Welcome to another study session of the Blueprint for Black Power. I am Ikemba Ajore of We Charge Colonialism podcast. Uh, we're a grassroots think tank. This is one of our podcasts that we do covering issues that are affecting African people, Black people in the diaspora and on the continent. I should have fixed this lighting. All right, so it's been about 3 weeks since I had a session. So it feels good to be back. Feels good to be get back into the groove of things. Want to appreciate everybody who has that is joining this study. And if this is your first time, make sure that you go back, subscribe to our channel, and make sure you go back and look at some of the previous sessions because I tend to go through this whole book. Um, each chapter as we examine each paragraph. We're going paragraph to paragraph, getting into Dr. Amos N. Wilson's work, The Blueprint for Black Power. So again, I'm Ikemba Ajore. I want to encourage everybody to like and share this podcast. Like and share this podcast before we get into like and share this podcast. Make sure you visit our website, wechargecolonialism.org. Check out our articles as well as look into our Black Power Fund. We have this new fund that we're going to be launching in 2023. Anybody that you know that's a gardener or a farmer, they can apply for this grant. We're giving away $500 for those people who are working with the soil. You know, this is to support food sovereignty. So anybody that you know, or if you yourself are a gardener or a farmer, you are eligible for this grant. So that's going to be launched in February of 2023. So make sure you visit our website, get more information about our organization and so forth. So hopefully you all liked and shared this podcast. Before we get into uh, this study, this reading, just a little background on why I'm doing this study. Uh, of course, I'm reading, I pulled the book up, The Blueprint for Black Power. That's how old this book is. Reading The Blueprint for Black Power, Dr. Amos N. Wilson. But I think it's important that we examine this work and begin to implement what Dr. Amos N. Wilson has written, I think, over 20 years. It has to be about 25 years now. And I see a lot of people putting in, how can I say, implementing some of the strategies that he put forth in this book. But the idea is to get more and more of our people to begin to embody the uh, the ideas that Dr. Amos N. Wilson is putting forth in this study. He's written several books on black violence. He's dealing with the development of the African genius. He has works on the falsification of African consciousness. So all of these works are very important. This particular work that I want to cover, because of the length of the book and the different subjects or topics that he's addressing in this book, I think it's sort of like the Black nationalist Bible in a sense, because it covers so many different areas. And so this is why I think it's important that we get as many people to join and be a part of this particular discussion, because this Dr. Amos N. Wilson's work should be something that every Black household, every African household should have and should be studying and embodying to be able to uh, transform this relationship that we have, this historical relationship that we have with Europeans and Euro Americans. So with that being said, I want to get into this to the where I'm going to pick up where I left off at on page 10. And I'm still in chapter 1, and we're dealing with power. And Dr. Amos N. Wilson goes into, and the reason why I want to kind of give like a summary, because it's been 3 weeks since I've had this study. He's talking about the different typologies of power. And so one of the first typologies of power that Dr. Amos N. Wilson is covering is force. And I talked about force and the use of force as ineffective. In the long term, it's going to be ineffective. In the short term, it may be very effective in regards to subduing a group of people, enslaving a group of people, and bringing those people under your power. But Dr. Amos N. Wilson talked about the inefficiency or the ineffectiveness of using force, a physical force as power, because of when you're using force against a person or a group, they know that they're being manipulated. It's quite obvious that they're being to forced to behave in a particular way. And so, with that being said, when you're conscious of this manipulation, you're conscious of your oppression, exploitation, you're more apt to do something about it. And so, what I'm going to get into now is um, how force is inefficient, but other means of power that is used to oppress and exploit African people. So I'm on page 10. For anybody that has the book and want to follow along, I'm on page 10 at the bottom, the last paragraph, the problematics of using unendured force. So that's where I'm going to pick up at. Appreciate everybody that's joining. Let me make sure my sound is good, though. All right. All right. So no one has said anything about the sound. Beautiful. All right, so with that being said, let's get into it. So the problematics of using unenduring force as the chief instrument of power utilized by a dominant group to achieve complex social material ends with economic efficiency and the barest minimum of social disruption motivates that group to develop and apply more subtle forms of power. These will be discussed below. However, at this juncture, we should note that current forms of domination of continental, Caribbean, North Central, and South American Africans, respectively, by Europeans is secured by more subtle and efficient means of political control than by the use of oppressive physical force. Consequently, the independence of African countries and former Caribbean colonies and the social assimilation of African Americans into the mainstream of white America by no means represents the lessening of European and Euro-American domination of or a fundamental change in the nature of European and African power relations in favor of the Africans, as persons so erroneously assume. Quite to the contrary, these historically apparent social political changes instead represent the increased subtlety and efficiency of European domination of African peoples. It should be noted that the ability to use physical militaristic force as the final arbiter of power relations still lies overwhelmingly in the hands of Europeans and Euro-Americans. It is this force differential that Africans across the diaspora must in some way resolve, neutralize, or frustrate if they are to gain true parity with Europeans and Euro-Americans and indeed gain their liberation for European domination. All right, so I'm going to stop there. Today, I'm going to go into two paragraphs today. But before I go into the second paragraph, I just want to reflect on this particular paragraph and what's being said. One thing I want to bring uplift is the use of the term Euro Americans to describe white Americans. I think that's very important too. In this struggle for a liberation, for sovereignty, for the right to self-determination by African people. And when I say African people, I'm talking about Black people, whether you're in the diaspora or on the continent, African Americans or African people. So, if you're Jamaicans, Haitians, these are African people. And so I'm speaking to all of these Africans in the diaspora and those on the continent. So the use of the term Euro Americans, I think, is very important. Because those white people who are in America, those are the Europeans that came here and colonized this country. And we should make that distinction. And so that we know that those people are those same people that are on the continent, on continental Europe, or whether on the island, the British Isles, and so forth. Those are the same people, right? Those are the people that we are struggling. Those are the people that we are fighting against. So I'm glad he makes that distinction when he's talking about Europeans, those on the continent, and those Europeans that are in America, Euro Americans. But in this particular paragraph, I think it's also important that what Dr. Wilson is talking about, sort of made some notes on this. The subtle use of the means of power becoming more subtle, right? So of course, I mentioned earlier how the physical use of power, that's going to be obvious. We know, like, I'm being for slavery. That was obvious. That's why there were so many revolts and rebellions against slavery all throughout the diaspora. Colonization. That's why there were independence movements to overthrow the yoke of colonialism, European domination. So, with that being said, there has to be more subtle uses of power to be able to control African people. And so African Americans, in a sense, we can look at for the last 150 years, 160 years, how Euro Americans have been adopting different strategies of oppression and exploitation, and also making concessions. The ability for them to be able to maintain their position relative to African people in this country is a result of concessions being made. Just think about any time that we step up, whether we march or we grab arms and we're ready to revolt and overturn this system of colonial capitalism. There's always like some leaders that step up and say, whether from the white community and those people from the black community that align themselves with the Europeans, and they step up and they say, "Hey, we're going to do something. Everybody, calm down. We're going to make some changes, and there may be some policy that is implemented, some policy that is enacted, some law, that has been enacted, and then it's looked at as a victory by some people, certain sector of the community. But the change never takes place for like the masses of people. I want to use uh, what happened with George Floyd as an example. Like not even just Breonna Taylor and all of these police killings, and as well as the brother, the jogger. I forgot what's his name. What's the guy in Georgia that was jogging who was killed? Can't believe I forgot his name that fast. But just to use them as examples, right? So there was this revolt as a result of what happened with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and people were asking for change. They were talking about abolishing the police. They were talking about defund the police. What happened with that? Ahmaud Arbery, thank you, Ahmaud Arbery. Let me never forget that name. I can't believe my mind just went blank. But what happened with the calls for defund the police and abolish the police? Now there's a group of us who still, we're still asking for that, right? We're still asking for the abolishment or community control, right? Community control for security. We don't need people outside of our community controlling our community. We're still asking for that. But what happened to all of the masses of people who were demanding that? Once there was some concessions made, once the guy who murdered George Floyd was sentenced to 20 years, so a lot of people looked at that as a victory. And so the fight, the rebellions, and all of that has come to a cease. And they're able to quell these things. They're able to quell revolts. Talking about the colonizers, the Europeans are able to quell these revolts and rebellions because they control the economy. They control the economy. They control the means of production. They control the means of distribution. So with that being said, because there's all people are dependent on those things. We're dependent on the resources. And if another people controls the economy, they're able to create division among the oppressed and exploited. They're able to buy people off, right? And so because of this dependency on these resources, not controlling those resources, a lot of our own people, what they call sellouts, right? A lot of our own people sell us out. And this is why it's important that we understand. But this is going back to the subtle means of oppression and exploitation that takes place. They don't have to use physical force anymore if they're able to control and exercise power power over you by influencing you or manipulating you and so forth. So this kind of goes into the next paragraph, psychic violence as a means of force. And I think this is very important right here. So let me read this. Psychic violence. I'm on page 11. Psychic violence, the most powerful obstacle, right? The most powerful obstacle. This is what Dr. Amos N. Wilson says. The most powerful obstacle against the liberation of African people African peoples from white domination and exploitation is not the ability of whites to use superior military or police firepower or the threat to use it against African insurgency, but is their ability to engage in unrelenting psychopolitical violence against the collective African psyche. It is the white monopoly on psychic violence and their devastatingly ingenious use of it against the minds of African peoples, which represent the greatest threat to African survival. Wrongs insightfully points out the nature of this form of violence. Quote, there is a form of conduct often described as psychic, psychological, or moral force or violence, which does not fit readily under the rubrics of any of the other forms of power. If physical violence involves inflicting damages on the body of a person, how is one to classify the deliberate efforts to affect adversely a person's emotions or his feelings and ideas about himself by verbally or in other symbolic ways insulting or degrading him? If power includes the production of purely mental or emotional effects and is not confined to the eliciting of overt acts, then the psychic assault of, say, a nagging, browbeating spouse or parent, the defamation of the character of a political foe, or even of an entire group constitute exercises of power. Damages to the psyche is surely as real as damage to the body. It is plainly not true that sticks and stones may break my bones, but names can never hurt me. Psychic violence, in which the intended effect of the perpetrator is to inflict mental or emotional harm, is continuous with physical violence. The ultimate force in the world is the force of mind. When that force is defeated, all is lost. Right? So again, and I'm gonna finish with this paragraph here, but again, like the importance of understanding the damage that psychic violence can do is equally equally as effective as physical violence, I guess you can say. But he talks about it being the most powerful obstacle. And the reason why it's the most powerful obstacle, because it makes physical violence unnecessary. Like, I don't have to, if I'm able to manipulate you, I'm able to influence you, right? Control your mind, then I don't have to use physical violence to make you do something. I can manipulate you and influence you to carry out what it is that I want to be carried out, right? So my power over you, my power to make you do something, is contingent upon my ability to be able to control your mind. And so, what are the ways that they're able to control minds? Is by controlling the institutions, the media, educational institutions, right? And this is why, so with the internet is so effective in being able to combat their control over the media, because now, as you can see, like, I'm here on WCC platform and I'm able to have an effect and impact people. But I think the problem is that we're going up against a machine though. And so it's going to take a lot of, support from our people and from the masses, right? Because the biggest resource that we have, or the most powerful resource that we have, is the people. Right? And so, if the people begins to support the smaller platforms that are really putting out positive information and is really looking to empower the masses of people, then we can make a change that way. But what happens is that there's a history of the colonizers being in positions where they control these key institutions that we have been dependent on for so long. So what they call there's a term that they call status quo bias, right? Where I may present you something that may be more beneficial for you than something that you have been doing. Let's just say I present, I come to you and I present you a platform, a podcast that may be more beneficial to you than the podcast that you've been watching. But because you've been watching this other podcast for so long, you're so used to it, you don't want to switch. You're just it's that status quo bias. You like what you like, right? And you don't want to change. And they usually, when they talk about status quo bias, they talk about with like phone companies and cable companies, right? As other examples that can be given. You know, electric company can come along and say, "Hey, I can slash your bill in half, slash your electric bill in half," and you're just like, I don't know. I'm good with the company that I have, right? That's status quo bias, right? But I use those examples to say that we're up against a machine that has been in place for so long that people are used to this dependency on the system has been accumulating over time, right? This emotional and mental dependency on the system has accumulated over time, and so we have to find a way to be able to overcome that, and that's what we charge colonialism is all about. But just like going back to Dr. Amos Wilson and the psychic violence, man, uh, he makes a point here. Let me see. I got some news. Cool. So psychic violence is used to defeat us, to destroy our dreams. Yeah. So this is another point that I wanted to make too. So the psychic violence, just going back to this history, right? When we look at the system that we're a part of, one of the uses of psychic violence is to make us feel like we're lesser than we are. And so there's constant images, there's degrading and derogatory ideas, opinions, images. These things are put out, words, these things are put out, right? And this isn't a physical assault, but this is an assault on our self-esteem. It's an assault on our psychology. And it makes us feel a particular way if we're not successful if we don't look a certain way, or if we don't have certain material things, if we don't have a certain car and so forth. So this sort of thing makes you that once they trap you into that, you having these things, then the next thing is, in order for me to acquire these things, I have to get an education. I have to, get a particular job, make a certain amount of money. Now the system got you. Now it's like that dependency on the very system that we're fighting. They're making you feel like your only means to success is to be a part of this system. And so we're fighting against, when we have people who are a part of the African community, part of the community that has been colonized, that has been exploited by the European. When they begin to align themselves with that, it makes it more difficult for us to be able to do what's necessary to liberate all African people on the continent and the diaspora, right? Because they're making the masses feel like self-determination isn't the key, that sovereignty isn't the key, integration is the key. To be a part of the system is the key, and a failure on our part, to be successful in this system is our own because of our own personal decisions and choices. It's not the system itself. And as African people, we have to say, why would we want to align ourselves with a people who, first of all, they brought us to these unknown shores, right? 400, 500 years ago, right? Brought us here, enslaved us. And after they enslaved, after the ending of chattel slavery, they segregated us. They put obstacles in our way so that we weren't able to be on equal footing to them. And these are the same people that we continue to, and I'm not into saying, like, I believe that we're all humans. I'm not saying that I think all people deserve rights. But what I'm saying is that we shouldn't be looking to integrate and be on equal footing or part of a system with a people that has been able to benefit at the expense of African people. We need to build our own system. And if they want to be a part of it, cool. But the system that they have built isn't for us. We should be focusing on building our own system so we won't have to worry about the psychic violence or the physical violence that's used to keep us in our place. And so the last point, I usually try to keep these short, but there was a lot to really go into in these couple of paragraphs. But the last point I kind of want to make too is Kwanzaa. So Habari Gani, to everyone out there, Habari Gani, Ujima, is today's principle that we're recognizing. And if we look at Kwanzaa is also an example of what we should be doing as African people. Particularly on the continent is easier, in nations, because I'm based in the United States, right, where it's a lot more difficult. But when you're in places like Ghana or Nigeria, or even Jamaica and Haiti, where you have Africans who are controlling, or who are in positions of control in those countries, right? But the only problem is that the leadership there's so much corruption with the leadership, who aligns themselves with the colonizers, that they're not able to at least practice the power that they should be practicing, even though they're in a key position. And Africa, all the resources is there in Africa, but there's still poverty and exploitation going on. So that's a result of just bad leadership. But in a place like the United States, it's a lot more difficult to separate ourselves from the European being the majority in this country, right? In regards to just nations in this country, they're a minority if we come together. But Kwanzaa is very important, because Kwanzaa was an institution that was created that separated itself from what America was doing and said, hey, this is a part of the African nation that we're building. We have our own day of recognition and celebration. And so it's important that Kwanzaa never becomes a holiday that's recognized by America, because that's going to defeat the purpose. And I thought it was important for me to say that. I thought that I wanted to get that out in this particular podcast, since we're recognizing Kwanzaa now. It's important that when we create certain institutions, Pan-African institutions, that they're not usurped by the European. These are revolutionary institutions that is meant for African people. It's African-centered, and it's part of our struggle, our fight to be a liberated and independent people. So with that being said, I hope this was a fruitful discussion. I want to appreciate everybody that jumped on. See some people. Yeah, there was definitely. And going back to the quote, I want to go. There was another point I wanted to make too, in regards to. But I think that kind of goes into the next paragraph. But Dr. Wilson is there's a point in here I will have to look for it, but I'll just get to it, that he's talking about in regards to the power relationship. I think it was in the first paragraph I was reading. If I find it, I'll read it again. But he's talked about how the power relationship hasn't changed. And so this goes to the subtle use of power that Europeans have been able to use so that they're able to maintain their position of power, because they've created this white position and black position. So black is more than just a group of people. And I may have talked about this before, right? It's more than representing a group of people. Under the system of white domination, black represents a position. And so that's why people who are not even African can be recognized under the system as black, because they occupy a certain position. And that's why white people who are not even Europe, who may not be traditionally looked at as European, historically looked at as European, can be considered white under the system of white domination, because they occupy a certain position, right? And you guys know, if you see how people check the white box, right? African American or black box, right? How a Mexican can check the white box, right? And be a part of a certain position. So we have to be very conscious of that. But with that being said, though, the point I wanted to make is how these positions are able to be sustained under the system because of subtle uses of force that Dr. Wilson is talking about. And we can't, there's so much, this complacency amongst African people, it needs to stop. There's too much complacency among our people. We're too involved in entertainment and all of these things, trying to look for ways to make as much money as we can under the system, which is doing a disservice to the masses of African people. We're aligning ourselves with an empire that not only oppresses and exploits Black people within the borders of the United States, but they also outsource that oppression and exploitation. And so this is something that we should never want to be a part of. Right. But going back to the dynamics between Black and white, Dr. Amos N. Wilson in the earlier in the earlier pages, page 7, he says, we must be ever conscious. We must be ever conscious of the fact that the establishment, whatever rewards it gives us, will also, if necessary to maintain its control, kill us. I'll read that again. We must be ever conscious of the fact that the establishment, whatever rewards it gives us, will also, if necessary to maintain its control, kill us. Right? So, with that being said, when times is good or relatively good, right? Sometimes there's a recession, but a recession here in the United States isn't like a recession in some of the developing countries and worlds, right? We're still able to survive to an extent. Make sure. Let's see my battery going low. I think it's very important that we understand that, hey, if times got really bad, they were really bad economically, bad in this country, where will we be if we're not able to defend ourselves against our historical enemies? We don't have a monopoly on force. And so Dr. Amos N. Wilson, he said somewhere in there that we must neutralize we must neutralize European force, European power. Right now, Europeans have a monopoly on power. And so however bad it is, it could be a lot worse if it got bad for them. And we have to be very conscious of that as well. So with that being said, I'm going to come to a close. I'll probably do another one of these sessions this week, probably Friday or Saturday. So make sure you subscribe to our channel so you know when the next time that I'm going to be doing another one of these sessions. But with that being said, too, Friday, Frank, one of my comrades, is going to be doing a talk at 10 o'clock on Friday. And then we have our weekly podcast this Saturday at 10 a.m. Where we are reading Dr. Kwame Nkrumah's Conscientism, and we're going to be discussing that. So make sure you join us on Saturday for that. Make sure you subscribe, you like, you visit our website, and also contact us and see how you can get involved if you want to be a part of this work that we're doing. We're a grassroots think tank, and part of our mission is to be able to control data or at least undermine the Europeans' monopoly on data or the influence that they have, right? Because we're able to kind of break the monopoly with the internet, but it's still a struggle because we support these European institutions like Facebook and Instagram so much. It's still difficult because we don't really, I'm doing this on YouTube, so just another example. So we got to find a way to get away from all of this. With that being said, I'm just happy to be back. It's been 3 weeks, so that's probably why I did this a little longer than usual. Appreciate you all. Let me see if I know you guys was dropping some stuff in there. Religion, religion institution, education institution, media institution. Yeah, and we have to control those things. If we keep Kwanzaa revolutionary, they won't usurp it. Yeah, absolutely. We have to keep it revolutionary. Once they talk about Kwanzaa as a national holiday, it's over for Kwanzaa. It's time to create something else. But we're the ones who are able to prevent that from happening, right? They can't do anything if we're organized and united. Dr. Amos N. said, Dr. Amos N. Wilson said, this is about European constant military, economic, and technological differential, power of definition, domain of discourse, European as standard, education for servitude, etc. are all. Yeah, that's why we got to read his work, man. He has, Dr. Wilson has the answers. Right. So I'm Ikemba Ajore. Again, thank you all. Going to bring this to a close. And y'all can follow us too on our platform. Look in the description. Make sure you're following us on Instagram, Facebook, and so forth. And so till next time, peace and Black Power.